Minister Nathi Mthethwa, highlighting a number of issues there. The fact that applications for athletes will be made only through the national federations, also outlining the amount of money that has been allocated for athletes as well as those in the arts and culture fraternity, an amount amounting to 77 million rand. But we are joined now by Newzroom Afrika's sport editor, Marc Lewis, who's been following the sport minister's briefing. Lovely to have you with us.
Thank you. It's been a long time since you and I sat here together.
It feels like forever, but I must say,
here.
It always feels good. Heard your last question there that you asked to the minister.
Yes.
Regarding the PSL, etc.
Well, it landed up being the Deputy Minister, Ms. Mthethwa, that answered the question, and I think she's been doing a great job alongside Nathi as well during this difficult time. And for me, that is a pressing question because I'm delighted that the PSL is coming back. Really, I am. I think there's millions of South African fans that will be so excited for this weekend. Reminder, the Nedbank Cup starts on the weekend. The league then returns on Tuesday next week. But I recall clearly that there was a timeline that suggested that only when South Africa hits level 1 will football be allowed to return. And after sitting through 130 days of lockdown, many South Africans might well say, well, if we waited this long, I want to wait until it's done correctly. So my question then to essentially the Deputy Minister was, what has now been done to accelerate that process? How could we have moved from level 1 to now all of a sudden level 3B, where we currently are, or level 3A 2.1, wherever we are now? Infections are rising. Gauteng is seen as the epicenter of this coronavirus here in South Africa, yet we are basing the bio-bubble here in SA. The stadiums will be based in Gauteng. The training grounds will be based in Gauteng. And according to the Deputy Minister, that both football bodies, SAFA and the PSL, have worked incredibly hard to make sure that what they have put on offer has been correct. They've ensured that everything will be, completely cleaned in and out every single time. There's been a lot of question as well around the timing of the matches, because we sat down with the PSL this past weekend, in fact, for some form of an editors forum. And one of the questions was, why then are we seeing such a massive jump between the two kickoff times? And the PSL correctly pointed out that it needs to be a brand new stadium every time a new match is played. So perhaps what you would have seen before in seasons gone by is that there'd be a 3 o'clock game, a 5 o'clock game, and an 8 o'clock game. Whereas now we're seeing massive breaks between, because we have to ensure that at the end of match 1, the entire stadium gets cleaned out. The change rooms, etc., need to be completely fumigated. This fogging, this demisting that we've been seeing become very popular during this time needs to happen to ensure that the players that are coming in for the second match are now able to do so on a completely clean process. So these are the things that apparently, according to government, the bodies have done to try and convince them that we don't have to wait for level 1. We can resume now.
Do you get a sense that there were more financial and economic considerations that were put in place here? As you said, we're not at level 1 at all, and we're still going to be starting.
The term, the PSL has a financial obligation to complete the league, is probably one that is a rather heavy-loaded term as well, because if you read between the lines there, you do understand that there's massive financial pressure to get the season completed. We know the amount of money that goes into broadcasting. We know the amount of money that goes into advertising as well. And if there are no matches on the TV, there is no money coming in. And I imagine, again, I point out that we can see on our screens 130-odd days of lockdown. 130-odd days of minimized income is certainly going to make everybody feel its effect. So I do feel that they were waiting and pressing for the very first opportune window to open up, and now's become that time. That said, though, if and when you can comply with all the obligations, if the compliance officers can prove that things will be done correctly, then it shouldn't be about the money. However, there's no denying that football is a business, especially in South Africa. It is a big business as well. Let's not underestimate the value that we are talking about here. Football is an enormous business. So when there is big business, there is big pressure. And after that length of wait that we've had now because of COVID-19, you would imagine that all of those parties have now somehow been able to converge and find some middle ground where it's the compliance officers, it's government, it's the business, it's the leagues, it's the teams. All of that has now come together to make the promises that this can be done safely. This bio-bubble has been a big talking point as well. Players have been promised their safety, because let's not forget that these men are human beings as well. They too need to go out onto the field and feel comfortable. So the bio-bubble has been assured that players will be negative when they enter. They will be tested again to make sure that they remain negative whilst they are there All of these little factors are suggesting that this can be done correctly.
There was also a bit of focus there, Mark, on rugby as well as netball. Where do the other sports fare in the discussion on reopening?
Well, this is one of the questions that I would love to ask the Minister as well. Unfortunately, we know now that the presser has ended, but this is exactly a point that a lot of people are asking as well. It's great that the PSL is returning, and we know that football is the big money maker in South Africa, but what about the other sporting codes? We know rugby, we're taking a look at, Australia and New Zealand. They're playing rugby every single weekend now. They are back. Now, to be fair, some might argue that Australia and New Zealand, COVID-19 terms, are in a very different position to South Africa. But where are we with that application? The answer from the DG was that it's still being taken a look at. So if we're still considering it, we're still looking at the application. How far exactly is that application? Are we looking at months away? Are we looking at just weeks away? Because there's no denying that SA Rugby, as are the PSL, are desperate to get back onto the field of play. But they can only do so when the respective compliance officers believe that it is safe to do so. Government is now looking into that. Netball is a very similar scenario as well. They are begging and crying out to see when they can return to play. If you recall, we had Cecilia Molokwane on Prime not too long ago where she said, we are desperate to return to the court. We need to play. We are hosting the World Cup in 2023. By the time this year comes and goes, and take a look how fast we've gotten to August, so that shouldn't be too far. In a couple of blinks, we'll be in 2021. And then the discussion will be, in 2 years' time, we're hosting a World Cup here.
Will we be ready?
Will we be ready? Will the team be allowed to be competitive?
It really does look that this is something that's not just unique to us and South Africa. I think a lot of international sporting games that were planned would have to be moved.
Of course.
Because COVID-19 is so unpredictable, and we're literally taking it day by day.
I think the good thing for us is that the window of 2023 is and seems incredibly far away. One wouldn't imagine that the tournament itself would be under threat in 2023. However, the preparation that's required until that point may well be. One of the arguments around Tokyo 2020 and why it got moved out was not necessarily that Japan wouldn't be ready now. It's that the athletes competing and getting ready and qualifying for these games weren't given the opportunity. So if we continue to remain locked down until the middle of 2021, let's call it the end of 2021, the athletes, the netball players themselves might well argue that 12 months is not enough to prepare for a World Cup. So before we get ahead of ourselves and suggest that the Netball World Cup may not happen, I imagine that there are probably some discussions taking place locally as to what needs to happen by when to ensure that we can deliver a safe games, we can deliver a competitive team as well, and we can deliver on all those financial promises as well, because the World Cup brings about big budget.
Well,
and as the South African host, we need to do that.
Well, thank you so much, Mark. A great roundup of where we are with the sports. But once again, it's so important to look at the microcosm, to look at the fact that day-to-day issues also need to be taken care of. A lot of the athletes are actually not working right now. And maybe for another discussion, is 2,200 Rand even enough?
How far does that go, Tommy?
How far is that going to go? But we'll
one.
Continue unpacking that as the day progresses. Lovely to have you with us once again, Mark. That's our Marc Lewis there, focusing on the Minister's presentation regarding sports, arts and culture.